I have to clarify something we said last week because you're talking about the Parhelm Dover and Seirei Avodah Zarah. So someone asked the question. This is very confusing. Yes, it is confusing. So we'll discuss this. The first case is the king, the Asher Nasi Echeta. That is in the beginning of Leviticus. How does it work? The Nasi, like I said, it actually is a complicated term. Sometimes it means king, but sometimes there are actually people who aren't king who are called Nasi. The head of the Sanhedrin is also called Nasi, and eventually he's supposed to, with the rest of the Sanhedrin and Navi, find someone to appoint as king, at which point the king becomes, status of Nasi. It says, Asher Nasi Echata. He does anything wrong necessarily. His particular chatas is the HaKorbanot Se'iri Zim Zachar Tamim. He brings a he-goat as his offering. And it says here, HaKohen HaMashiach. The Kohen HaMashiach, that means the high priest who sins. And Chazal say, because it uses, instead of HaKohen HaGadol, it says actual Mashiach, it means a high priest who is actually anointed. If he's unanointed, then he doesn't bring this. It says here, he brings par ben bakar tamim lashem chatat. So the king brings a he-goat, and the Kohen Gadol brings a bull. Fine. Go to Shkagos Yud Beis. That's in the Rambam. Shkagos is in Korbanos, Sefer Korbanos. Rambam divides it up basically. There's Avoda and Shkagos. Well, Nasi, yeah, Nasi. Nasi is like the prince or whatever. So Nasi is a term used throughout the Torah, for example.
Okay.
We don't have Lifnei Melech B'Yisrael.
You say the Nasi is the king.
Yeah. Rashi points it out based on the Chazal said that.
So why
does it say Nasi? Nasi is a more general term. Nasi is very good if you compare this. For example, the Messianic king in Yechezkel is always called Nasi. Well, this is an earlier shir. He's always called Nasi. And the leaders of their individual tribes were called Nisiim. And the Sanhedrin is called Nasi.
Because it was doing when Moshe Rabbeinu was there.
Gog is called the Nasi of Meshech and Tuval, not the king. Nowadays, a lot of republics, what do you call the guy at the top of the republic? A Nasi, but that's in Hebrew, but that's basically based on this biblical idea that Nasi, like the Rambam says, means someone who doesn't have rank higher than him. Okay? Ranks the highest. The difference between a Nasi and a Shofet. How was Yoshua? Does it say Yoshua Melech? But the Rambam says Yoshua's Melech. He's Melech all over the place. Rambam says Halachli is a Melech, appointed by the Navi, this and that. So why is he not Melech? Melech because he didn't have the rank of Melech. He's the highest. He's the leader of the Jewish people. In Shkagos, the 12th parak, says, "Kol davar shechayvin al shigato chatat kavua." If you have something that a person would have to bring a chatat kavua, that means a permanent chatas, means not as opposed to olev yored, variable price. Sometimes the person's too poor to bring a korban, so instead of an animal, he brings birds. And if he can't bring that, he should bring a mincha, a meal offering. Chatas kavua means no, the prescribed animal is that for this sin, and that's it. It stays there. If it was the high court, what's called the Sanhedrin, they're the ones who ruled accordingly. They permitted this forbidden act or this forbidden food, whatever it is, a sin. Everybody unwittingly did what the Sanhedrin said on the support of the Sanhedrin. Basically, they did this on the Sanhedrin's authority. Sanhedrin said it. We thought that this part of the animal is chalev, forbidden fat. The Sanhedrin said, no, this piece is mutter, so we're all starting to eat this piece. And then they realized, oh, there was some more debates because that fellow who disagreed with the Sanhedrin, the one guy in the minority, they didn't kill him as a Zakin Mamri because he went along with the Sanhedrin. And he told people, follow the Sanhedrin, but I will continue arguing my position until you see the righteousness of my position. And eventually could convince the Sanhedrin that they made a mistake, I guess 6 years later, whatever it is. So now they have to make up for it. They realize their mistake. So they have to bring a korban chatat for their mistaken or their unwitting ruling or their instruction to everybody to do this. Even if they themselves didn't actually do it. The Sanhedrin's not guilty. Just everybody else ate the chalev. We don't look what the Beis Din did. Whether they did or they didn't do. Their instruction. That's what they're held accountable for. The shorish of horaya is yud resh silent hey, and whenever yud is at the beginning of the shorish, it's also a vav, and whenever silent hey is at the end of a shorish, it's also a yud. Okay, examples. So anytime you have yud resh daled shorish, yarad is the past tense. So there's a yud in the shorish. But when it's in the hifiel, that yud becomes a vav. Ho read. Okay, so the yud stays but becomes a vav. And when you have a silent hey at the end of a shoresh, like asa, in certain constructs, it becomes a chirik, a yud. Asinu, ra'inu, ra'iti. Where that yud come from? And the chirik sound before it, because silent hey at the end of a shoresh is basically like having a yud. Okay, so a person shava means, what does shava mean? Past tense mean he took captives. Okay, lishbot, with the tough is part of the shoresh in that case. Okay, the not part of the shoresh. It's just because la'asot. Where did the tough come from? So shevi, when you say the noun form of that is shevi, so it should be sheva with the silent hey. No, silent hey at the beginning of a segment noun becomes a yud with chirik, shevi, correct? Like petty. Okay. Or tenny. There's all sorts of other words that have that mishkal. Okay. So no, I'm just trying to explain where horaya. The word horaya is an interesting word. The shorish is yud resh silent hey, and that's also the shorish of what other word? What noun comes from that word? Well, it could be yeri, which means shooting. Okay, but that's the kal form. In the hifiel, it's hora, means he taught. And there's another noun that's great about this. Instead of putting a hey at the beginning, if you put a tough at the beginning of it and you make another type of noun, you get Torah. The word Torah's shoresh is from the word instruction. Okay, lehorot means to teach Torah, instruct. So Torah means an instruction. Fine. Regular people don't have to bring this korban chatas. It's the beis din. Umahu korban shrivin al shkagazo. If they actually permitted avodah zara, they let people know that that it's okay to go to church. Let's say, okay, if going to church was a iser chatos, and then they realize their mistake. So they have to bring a bull as a burnt offering and a he-goat as a sin offering. So this sin offering comes with a bull as a burnt offering. So there's par and seir. For avodah zarah, par burnt offering, seir as a guilt offering, as a sin offering, and one for each shevet, by the way, because each shevet. Wait a second, right? Each shevet is technically its own okay, goyo kahal goyim. Every shevet has its own independence, but that's why every shevet had to have its own nasi back in the day. How many times do we read about nasiim of individual shevets? A few times in Tanakh. In Moshe Rabbeinu's days, there was 2 generations of nasiim. Well, who? Yeah, and he's poskening like this way. Yeah. So it makes sense. The korban zehu amor b'farshat shlach. That's what it says in Parshat Shlach, like I saw a few weeks ago. V'aya im einei ha'ida ne'asta l'shkaga. Einei ha'ida, that's the beis din agadol. Mipiash mo'elamdu she'b'shigat avodah zarah hu medaber. And v'im b'shar kretot, let's say it's in the other Isser covers, like I said, chaylev, like you said, it's the type that regular people would have to bring a chatas kavua. Mevi kol shevet v'shevet par chatat. Every shevet just brings one par as a chatas, not a par as an ola and a seer as a chatas, just that bull, but as a chatas. That's called the par helm dover. V'zeh more b'farshas vekra, and that's what it says in vekra, the one we see there. V'im kol adat yisrael nishgu, yishgu. So it turns out if the beis din ruled that certain forms of avodah zarah were permissible and everybody acted on their authority, so what happens? They're going to bring 12 bulls as burnt offerings and 12 goats as sin offerings. And those sin offerings are burnt. By the way, an ola is entirely burnt on the mizbeach. When it says a goat, he-goat sin offering is entirely burnt, it means not on the mizbeach. The parts that would have been eaten by the kohanim are taken out beyond the temple and burnt. That's a chatas nisrefet is. Sharei dama nichnas latim. Well, the Beis Hadeshin area outside the temple, outside of the Har Bayis, where they had a place where they did this. There's also a place where they took out the Trumas Hadeshin. There was a Shefech Hadeshin or Beis Hadeshin. Okay? That was burnt on Mount of Olives. So there's a place. So the sign for this is if it's type of chatas that the blood is sprinkled, not like we saw last week. Chatas, they would apply the blood to the edge, to the corners of the altar with the fingers. And then there's a type of chatas, like a Yom Kippur type of chatas, or we saw the par Kohen Mashiach, and that the Kohen Gadol basically has to sprinkle this blood on behalf of all the people. He has to bring it to the golden altar inside the actual temple, where instead of they're putting incense, that's where he does the sprinklings. So when you have the sprinkle of blood inside the actual Beis Hamikdash, it means that this chatas will be burned beyond the temple courtyard. It means somewhere else. So these are called Seirei Avodah Zarah. Even though there's the par Avodah Zarah, burnt offering par, and a seir, that's a he-goat as a sin offering, that's called Seirei Avodah Zarah. If it's the other mitzvahs that they ruled wrongly, like Chelev, Mevin Shnei Masar Parim Chataot. Okay, then they just bring 12 bulls as sin offerings, and those are also nisrafot. Those are also burned not in the temple. Mesha Daman Nichnas Lifnim, was those also their blood is sprinkled inside the actual temple. The Chol Par Mehen Nikra Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. So one of the things that was confusing is we said Par Helam Davar, and we saw there's a Par Avodah Zarah. Par Helam Davar is the simple bull that's a sin offering for most of the Averos, and that just it comes on its own. And then there's the par of Avodah Zarah that's brought with the Seir Avodah Zarah, and it's that par itself is a burnt offering. That's not the main service for whatever reason. It's the blood of the Seir that's sprinkled inside. So I hope that clarifies that. We'll get to this again when we do this. Well, you have a question there? No. You guys have a Zimun. Yeah.
No.
Didn't eat together? Oh, okay.
When the part of Avodah Zarah just be, and just add on the sleeve.
No, because there's different. The Par Helm Davar is a chatos, and its blood is sprinkled inside the heichal, and the body of that par is then burned outside the temple. Whereas the par of Avodah Zarah is a burnt offering. Its blood isn't necessarily sprinkled inside the temple, and it's just applied to the altar like a regular olah. And then the par is burnt like an olah, and it's the seir that's brought with it that its blood is sprinkled on the mizbeach inside the heichal, and that seir itself is taken out to be burned.
Oh.
There's a difference between chatas and olah, like we saw last week. For example, what's the main difference? The olah's blood and a chatas's blood. The olah's blood is splashed on the corner of the mizbeach, two corners. What? Well, it actually splashed from ground level.
Yeah, but
Then olah, it's not splashed upwards. It's not above the chuda sikra. I think
no.
we saw it last week. Well, no, an olah is above the chuda sikra. Wrong. Okay, let's see. Where's the Rambam Paskin? We saw this last week. It says here, Ola Asham Shlamim. I should put this on. Okay, let's see here. We were in the last week. We saw the 5th paragraph. Put it over here. Okay, so let's see about the blood of the Ola and the Asham and the Shlamim. This is opposed to the Pesach. There's 3 categories: Ola, Asham, Shlamim, the way their blood is applied, and then Chatas, their blood is applied in a unique way. And then there's the Pesach, Bechor, and Meiser, but the blood is just poured applied to the base of the altar. Okay, so it says here, we'll read it. Well, let's clarify. I could be wrong. Remember, I didn't write this. Halavai knew this all by heart, but we're just trying to learn this together. Ola Asham V'Shlamim. Bein Shel Yachid, Bein Shel Tzibur is Rikat Dam Shloshtan Al Gabe Mizbeach Shaveh Lo Olam. There's one way to apply their blood to the altar. It's thrown, literally thrown. He takes the blood in a cup. And why is it called the mizrak? Because, it's a cup that doesn't have a base. You can't put the cup down, and you're supposed to throw blood with it. So, yeah, see the lower half of the mizbeach. Rama Paskins. Okay, good. I'm glad I remembered that. But which two corners? Kara Mizrach is the northeast corner and the southwest corner. Okay, so I drew a little bit of map. Maybe you're makbili. By the way, do you want the chatas of is done above the chuda sikra?
Yeah,
we're going to get to that this week. Chatas of, the coin has to climb the small ramp to get up to the sovev in order to squeeze the blood of the bird out onto there. We're going to see that soon. Do you want a copy of this? We have another copy. Yeah, it's underneath in the shulchan. Okay. We're gonna have my smaller copy. Also, we use this one on Shabbos. My God, we're okay. Let's take a drink and then we'll see this here. So we also saw last week about how the Kohen has to dip his blood And the chatas, he actually dips his blood and applies it with his fingers. So I use this general term for applying the blood. Sometimes the blood is thrown, sometimes the blood is poured, sometimes the blood is applied with dipping the fingers, and sometimes the blood is squeezed out onto the mizbeach if it's a bird. All right. So there's many different ways to get the blood to the mizbeach. And in the temple itself, that means in the Heichal, the Kodesh, and the Kodesh Kodashim has a Kohen apply blood by flicking, sprinkling like this with the finger, right? Achas v'achas. So there are many different ways to apply blood. Okay, and it's all mandated by the Torah, and there's a specific way to do it, and that's the way it has to be done. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam kol nichya b'dvaro.
What you want to say?
What?
What you want to say?
Oh, just reviewing because we have to learn Parak Shishi now. The sixth parak. Okay, go to the sixth parak. This is great. Now we're going to talk about the Ola, the burnt offering. There's some pretty graphic things here, and I didn't bring any pictures, so we'll go through. I hope we'll do it quickly because we're not here to dismember animals, but that's what it's talking about. So you should know a little bit animal anatomy also. You have pictures there. I should have brought the Rabbi Lach book. I had the first edition. He made it much better just for studying Hulin. He has dissections of animals and chickens and things like that. Chickens are never brought as a korban, even though Jews eat chickens by far the most of any animal. Right? That's what Jews basically eat, chicken all the time. They've been eating chickens forever. You know, Chazal measure things in what? What's Chazal's measurement? The egg of a chicken. You know, chicken eggs, because chickens are ubiquitous and have been with us since forever. You know, like cats, dogs, and chickens. You can't imagine Mishneh times without the three of them, and pigeons also. So that's what we have. So we've been eating chicken forever, but it cannot be a korban. Ironically, it cannot be a korban. So it says, it is a commandment of Torah to burn the Ola as it is written in the Torah. Exactly as it's written in the Torah. By the way, how the Rambam counted mitzvahs is different than others. So the Rambam has to say this, he counts this as a mitzvah. Others might not, or count it as multiple mitzvahs, maybe to burn the Ola and to apply the blood. How you count the mitzvahs is, you know, you could make a whole doctrine about how to count the mitzvahs. So wait a minute. What's the only animal which is actually entirely burnt? We saw about the Ola, for example, that the way the Ola is processed, the blood is applied to the altar in a certain way, it's splashed on the altar, and the Ola is also skinned, right? And we're going to read here that things that come off if like the hooves are detached, the horn is detached from the animal. Let's say it had horns, and other parts of it are detached before the animal is actually brought to the Mizbeach. So once they're detached, they're detached. They are not burned on the Mizbeach. What's the only animal that is entirely burned? Okay, the only animal where it says some of the blood is caught and the animal entirely is burned. No dismemberment, no skinning, no nothing. Hint, it's this week's Parsha. The Paraduma. The Kohen is supposed to catch the blood. He's shechts it, catch the blood, sprinkle some of the blood, and then the entire animal is basically placed whole on this pile of wood, the pyre, Pyre, and burnt entirely like that. So that's the only thing that's burned. So that's a question for kids, by the way. Tomorrow night if we're at Rabbi Tar, so that's going to be the question for the kids. Don't give it away. So we always ask a question to see if the kids or the adults know it. It's a riddle. So that's the riddle for this week's parsha. So how do you do it? Ketzad ma'aseh ola. So how do you do a burnt offering? Shochet v'zorek hadam k'mo shebe'arnu. He's supposed to slaughter. He could be anybody who slaughters, by the way. Bala korban if he knows how to shech, so he can do it himself. Mm-hmm. And the kohen is the one who throws the blood. How to shecht?
No, yeah.
Anyway,
because how we come to the parah.
Well, there's ways to do it.
Cow.
A lot of people could do it. I don't know.
No.
What?
You don't understand my asking. Sorry.
So ask in Hebrew.
אוקיי. הנקודה היא כזאת, ישראל לא יכול להגיע למקום השחיטה שם.
Yes, he can.
לא יכול להגיע.
Oh, we were arguing about this yesterday. What do you mean? A regular Jew, assuming the temple is constructed, can go into the temple courtyard and stand in the temple courtyard.
יכול להגיע ליד
Yeah, they used to do it. It says, what does it say in Yoma? It says when the Kohen Gadol would show up on holidays to do the service in the temple courtyard, when Kohen Gadol shows up first thing in the morning, the Azar is already full of Israelites. Now, this is something I was showing a friend of mine. You learn that Gemara in Sukkah. It talks about Lulav and Esrog. It talks about how they would proceed around the Mizbeach with their Lulavim. And Rashi and Tosfos assume that regular Jews didn't do this procession because regular Jews cannot enter the west side of the temple courtyard. The west side of the altar is what's between the altar and the temple edifice, the Heichal. And it says that Jews aren't supposed to go there. And the way Rashi and Tosfos understand it, no exceptions. So, of course, on Sukkot, when they do this procession with the lulav and esrog, regular Jews didn't do a complete circuit. They couldn't. They couldn't go to the west side of the altar. And so too when they did the mitzvah of Arava, regular Jews did not proceed around the altar with the Arava. It was only Kohanim. That's how Rashi and Tosfos understand the Gemara. But the Rambam says, and we pointed out the way he understands the Perush Mishnayos, and also in Hilchot Beis Bechira and other places, Rav Kapach points this out many times. The Rambam says that Baal Mum and a Kohen who's not wearing the proper garments cannot go in the west side of the altar, but a regular Jew can if he has a tzorech.
Wow.
Regular Jews go there lefiyat tzorech, tzorech mitzvah, and that's what the Rambam holds. And that's why, according to the Rambam, regular Jews on Sukkot did a complete 360 procession around the altar with their lulav and esrog, and also with their arava. When it came time every day, the tilas arava, pick up an arava branch and go around. So what does it mean in the Gemara that they didn't make a gzera on aravas in the temple because the Kohanim do it? The gzera was carrying an arava in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, maybe. You might come to do that. But it says the Kohanim were the ones who brought a gigantic branch of an arava tree from which they picked. I remember they did this also with Shul once. How do they give everybody enough arava branches? Plenty in Hoshana Rabbah morning. They basically cut down half an arava tree and put it outside Shul, so you could just pick off all the ones you want. Or that Shul in Beit Sha'an, where they have a leak. There's a pipe that's leaking. A municipal pipe is spritzing water all the time, 24/7. There's an arava tree right in front of the shul. That's where everybody gets their aravas. It's great. It's also wasteful. You don't need to water with a arava tree so much, but whatever. Or you could be insane and plant an arava tree right next to your house. So, you could do that like 7 times, and the 7th time it succeeds. That's the it took me 7 times. I always had I have an arava tree. I'm up to my 7th arava tree. I had all sorts of misfortunes leading up to when finally I got it to stick. Okay. I remember the contractor destroyed my rubber tree. It was terrible. Yeah. So thank God it's persevering, and I planted another rubber tree. Where I planted a rubber tree? I found, this will be funny, outside of Shemesh Magain, the bomb shelter shul, the French shul. So they had a drip from the air conditioner outside. And before China virus, it was just open area. Before the China virus, they had just an open area outside the shul. It wasn't paved. I planted an arava there, and it started growing in the drip of the air conditioner. During the winter, they run the air conditioner all the time. During summer, it gets water, and during the winter, there's enough water there. It was fine. And then they wanted to pave that whole area, and they paved it. They destroyed the arava that was growing there. Okay, the arava started sprouting. Yeah, they got rid of the arava. Okay, so the point is, understand this Gemara, that when it says that the Kohanim were specifically the ones in charge of the arava, it means the Kohanim were the ones who brought the aravas to the temple. And the mitzvah was only done in the temple courtyard, so there's no chashash of violating Shabbos and walking around the Arava and Rosh Hashanah. So the Rambam understands that regular Jews were on the west side of the temple courtyard. Wow. So a regular Jew could slaughter, and even then, the point is that there are many. Even if it's not a burnt offering has to be slaughtered on the north side of the altar. A burnt offering is slaughtered on the north side. There's many places where, even according to Rashi and Tosfos, on the north side, where a regular Jew can go. So a regular Jew can slaughter his own burnt offering, as long as he knows what he's doing, or he appoints someone else to do it. So it says here, he has to then throw the blood. Mafshit u'minateach. What's mafshit? Take off the skin, the whole hide of the animal. And minateach means he has to cut into pieces, according to the Rambam, we'll see, in a very strict way, strictly prescribed, like the Mishneh says. First he cuts this leg and this hind leg, and this piece of the animal goes with that leg. We're going to see in the windpipe. There's a whole a lot of technical issues there, and exactly how it's to be cut up. But then there are those who paskin. The Mishnah says how they used to do it, but it's not ma'akev. And perhaps if there's a more efficient way or a different way to cut up although you can, which basically means that a lot with the Rambam paskins is not halacha likuva. The Rambam just put a lot of history here, but they would say that's history. Maybe you could cut up some other efficient way. Rambam. Respectable way. The Rambam basically took a lot of history and paskined it. That's what they say. That's going to be the opinion of Tosfos here, I think. We'll see it in its place. It says here, Umaktir koha nitachim al gabeam mizbeach shnemar viktir kohen al koha mizbecha. So there are parts of, by the way, of the oil, like I said, he's skinning it. The skin is quite heavy. That's already part that's not burned. What else isn't burned? They're going to wash the entrails. Those are all the kishkas. They wash them off. It says about the paraduma in this week's parsha, it get basically burnt al pirsha yisrof, right? Sometimes you see that. What is al pirsha yisrof? What's the perish?
You know it.
Yeah, perish chagechem. God's like it's waste materials. It says about the paraduma. Very interesting. We have to do a paraduma soon. Okay. It says here, "V'sarafet ha'parah. Some other kohen will burn this paraduma in front of him, the one who's in charge, Elazar Kohen. Basically, the skan has to do it. Okay. But although the Mishnah says it was under the authority of certain quantum gedolim that they did it, so I guess the Kohen Gadol sent his number 2 to supervise. Et oravet b'saravet dama, it's skin and it's flesh and it's blood. Why do they mention all 3, by the way? Shot, because in an ola the skin isn't burned, and in chatos the meat isn't burned. That's eaten, and the dam normally isn't burned. When do we burn dam? Any dam that spills out of the korban, if it's caught, it's applied to the altar, and the leftovers are spilled on the base. And other dam is just washed away. But here, you say that the animal is still intact. It's the skin is burned with it, and its flesh is burned with it, and so is its blood. Al pirsha yisrof. And we also don't clean out its kishkas. Normally, you wash out whatever waste materials and other icky stuff you might find inside the animals, its abdomen. In this case, you do not. You just take the paraduma, and it says, by the way, there's a stage. Rambam says, based on Chazal, how does the Rambam know how does the Kohen know when to throw in the 8 erez and the shni tulat and izov? Where 8 erez? A piece of cedar wood, shni tulat, the red string, that's where red string comes from, and a piece of hyssop, okay, zatar. He throws in a little zatar. How does he know when to do it? It says when the cow's belly bursts open from the heat. Right? So this is something you do. So an ola is very different than the paraduma. So everything is burned on the altar. It means after being cut up nicely, and they say it should be presentable. So each piece is washed and presented, brought in the most respectable manner, I guess, as it was back then. It has to be cut up a certain way because that's the kvod shemayim. Semer sheberashei kvasim, the hair on top of the kevas's head. They have a lot of extra hair here, wool. Seyar shebezakana tayashim, the beard of these goats. Older billy goats have a little bit of a beard here. The atzamot, let's say just bones. Agidim, sinews, karnayim, the horns. Tlafayim, those are the hooves, right? Yeah, the hooves. Bismachein mechubarim maktrina kol. All these pieces, if they're still attached to the animal when the time comes, let's say the head still has the zakan and the se'ar barosh, and the tzemer on the head, and the bones and the horns, or the hooves are still connected to the feet, that all gets burned. Maktrina kol shnemar erakol. V'im perishu, some of them became separated from the animal. The animal lost its hoof in the process. I don't know how that happens, but or the horns fell off. I don't know. Horns don't just fall off. Even if the animal's dead, he was just dead now. It's not like his horns are going to fall. But for whatever reason, it lo yalu. Then they shouldn't go back onto the altar. The head is being brought. Somehow this bull lost its horns in between its slaughter, and when it came time to burn the head on the altar, so the horns will stay off. It says, you shall make your burnt offerings the flesh and the blood. But here it says hakol. So it means the kulan shapaku me'al. In this case, the resolution of psukim is that basically the main parts of the burnt offering are the flesh and the blood. The blood is applied, the flesh is burned. But any of these other pieces get dragged along. Extra bones, the flesh is being carried on the bones. So those get burned also. But if somehow the bone became separate from the rest of the flesh, so that bone would not be burned on the mizbeach. That's how you're mekayim both psukim. Well,
wouldn't you stop burning this in other places? So we can
yeah, you'll have to dispose of it, but you cannot burn it. Yes, you can't burn it on the mizbeach like a piece of the korban. The kulan shapak ume al mizbeach lo yachzir. Yeah, we saw this yesterday. Rosh Chodesh, we did a barbecue. I'm not a big fan of barbecues and fire, but I have a son who is. And so I humor him all the time. So I have him gather firewood. We'll put some in the grill. You saw how we do it, right? Okay, and we'll put some hot dogs there. And sometimes we saw them that because this is natural firewood, sometimes it pops. there's a buildup of some sort of gases in an oily part of the wood or a wet part of the wood, and the heat, it pops, right? So they're burning actual wood on the altar. Sometimes there's a pop. So something pops off the altar, lo yachzir. Okay, just a coal. That wasn't even a piece of food that's cooking on. Well, not me food. It's not our food. It's God's food, so to speak. Because it korbrani lachmi liyishai, right? And the mizbeach is called God's shulchan, right? And the Kohanim get a piece of the korban to eat. It's like they eat from shulchan gavoa, the divine table. So anything that pops off the mizbeach should not be put back on. So what do they do with it? Yeah, avarim shepaku me'al mizbeach. Let's say avarim. Okay, so here they said these pieces that fell off the mizbeach, the pieces that we just mentioned, the horns, the hooves, and things like that, those fly off. Those should be put back on. What if it's avarim? What's the actual pieces? The meat, the real parts of the korban that should stay on the mizbeach, they popped off. A mishben mamish, they have some real meat on them, not just a bone. Even if it's after chatzos alayla. What's the havamina? What's the havamina if it's after chatzos alayla? The answer is you could say chatzos alayla is already the mitzvah's over, right? Because Chazal said whatever mitzvah you're supposed to do at night, hekter chalavim, you have until chatzos to do, right? Yeah. Well, but really midiraisa you have until alos shachar. So you would have thought that it's already past midnight, so I shouldn't. Kamash balan, these things pop off the mizbeach. There's an avar, a fleshy foreleg of the ola. It was a bull that was brought as a burnt offering. So it pops off the mizbeach. It has mamish on it. Put it back on the altar's fire so it can continue to burn. Shneimar al mokdam mizbeach kol alayla. Okay, eisham mizbeach tukabo. Okay, hi'olah. It says zo torat holah. Hi'olah al mokdam mizbeach kol alayla. Remember, a fellow back in elementary school said in 8th grade that Parshas, this is Tzav. This is right at the beginning of Tzav, right? Tzav, we're Americans, so we read it normal, laying the Torah normally. And he said, this is the part of the Torah we should have someone who reads like an Israeli read it. That Monday or Thursday in school, it should be read by an Israeli because it just sounds better if you read it Israeli. If you make no distinction between Kametz and Patach, and you pronounce your suffs like a tough, so it has a better sound to it. That's what he said. I agree with him. It has a certain sound to it. V'im ein bahen mamish. Let's say the bone has no real meat left on it. Ein bahen mamish. Afilu paku kodem chatzot lo yachzir. Even if it pops off before chatzos, you shouldn't put it back on it. This is the same din as we said. A bone pops off the mizbeach during the day. Don't put it back on. Once it's been separate, it's not itself to be burnt. V'im ein bahen mamish. Okay, we read that. Nitcharecha basar. Let's say the meat, there's mamish, but it's all dried up, fully burned, charred. Yavesha alehen ke'etz. It's so dry, it's dry as wood, or as we say, dry as a bone in English. Ufaka ukodem chatzot, then they popped off before chatzot yachzir. Then they should be put back on. Achar chatzot lo yachzir. If it's after chatzot, then you treat it like it's just a bone or a hoof or a horn that fell off. Okay, well. Because it has no more mamish on it. It's no real meat no more. So it's like a bone. It's in the middle. It's like a compromise case.
It has to go back on the mitzvah.
There's a mitzvah still due, but Chazal said already the mitzvah, chatzot was the line that they instituted. I guess. I don't know. Because the Torah doesn't make there's no din d'oraisa that has to do with chatzos alayla. It's always the Rabbana. Very interesting. We can look at the sources you can bring the Frankel, but that's the way I understood it. It's like a compromise. It sounds like a hachra, right? Oh, lacha kedivriya machriya. So let's see the next one. How do you chop up the korban? I remember I said this when we went to that Tirgul Korban Pesach. So came time, they actually slaughtered a sheep in front of everybody. And then they needed to demonstrate Korban Pesach. What did they do? The first thing they do is you have to show how to skin the thing. Wow. Korban Pesach is also skinned, right? So who knows how to skin a sheep? Only Rabbi Giat knew how, the Yemenite fellow who teaches everybody how to do bris milah. He was over there. It's like, you came to do a Tirgul Korban Pesach, but none of you have any experience shechting and skinning an animal. So here's how you do it. And also removing the entrails. No one, have you ever done it before? No, of course not. Okay. Most people don't. You have to know how to check, by the way, certain parts for trephis. So very few people actually do this in real life. And a lot of kishkas, they don't really check so much. They just dispose of them. Kosher slaughterhouse, the blood, al aretz tishbechenu kamoyim. They don't save the blood, they're not looking for it. Whereas certain Gentile slaughterhouses, they save the blood, sometimes for food. Yeah, kind of creepy. In England, they do that. Or, they accuse us of blood libel, but you should know part of Eastern cuisine and certain European cuisine calls for blood. And sometimes they use it, like we said, as fertilizer. Even the Beis HaMikdash, eventually there was a thing. The Hekdesh sells the stuff that goes out to the Kidron Valley is used as fertilizer. So they have ways to save this. So when they cut up the olah, the evrei, these are the limbs, basically. Something it's called nithahim. And by the way, you should read. I was joking now. I say this with irony when I talk about the proper way to read Torah, like an American as opposed to an Israeli. As you know, we try to read with proper dikduk kriya. There's an objective way, a Masoretic way to do it, and it's not like this, it's not like that. And even if I try to do it my way, I still have my accent, and I can't do it. I can't make a proper kuf sound and tough tet sound all the time, right? I try, but there's a word here, nithahim, and the problem is when you read these parshas, there's a word there, nun, samich, kaf, yud, mem. That's nisachim. Nisachim means libations.
Okay.
And in Ashkenazic American Hebrew, at least, and also Yeshivish Hebrew, the tuf is pronounced just like a samich, and the chet's pronounced just like a kaf, and the nikud is the same because they're in the same mishkal, right? Nethach and nesech are in the same mishkal, so their plurals is the same mishkal, the same vowel forms. So nithahim is pronounced just like nisachim. So you're reading parts of Vayikra and Bamidbar, and you mention the nisachim and the nisachim. So you must pronounce, you should pronounce nisachim properly. Nun samich chaf yud mem is pronounced nisachim, and the pieces of the korban are called nithahim. Nithahim. That's the proper way to say it. Okay. No, nithahim. That's a tough. Tough without a dot is that sound. Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, you missed the class like in first grade. So. No, I'm saying no. This is to teach you how to read Hebrew. Yeah, everybody gets surprised. Oh, you're telling me how to read the Aleph Beis? I think I learned how to read Hebrew. That's the problem with being medakdek. It's the Gemara calls for it. The Gemara says you have to read Kriyas Shema properly, and the Rambam and the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch bring this as halacha. You should read these things properly. But the problem is you weren't taught this in first grade, and then you become a 20-year-old, or worse, you become a 40-year-old, and then you suddenly learn like, oh, the tough without a dot has its own unique pronunciation, and you can't be taught something new. Yeah, you're never told that, and that's it. So it must be the person who's telling you this is a kofar, and you must not keep Shabbos in his own home, right? Yeah, I know a guy who came to that conclusion. Okay.
What?
He came to that conclusion. This guy's a bimidaki. He's trying to tell me how to pronounce a tough. He gave him 7 proofs as to why a vav is pronounced like a W.
Okay.
Of course, there are many. Vav is pronounced like a W. It's not a vet. So that it must be. That's all you said. I don't even know if you keep kosher in your house. Like such courses. Okay, so there you go. Okay. Says here that he's supposed to cut them up, and he's supposed to bring them to the altar. Yeah, it says to the ramp. The Kohen has to do this, by the way. And that's where they're salted. Why are we salting pieces of the korban? We saw that it says that korban minchat chaba melech timlach. V'lo tashbit melach brit olecha me'al minchatecha al kol korban chatzakriv melach. First, it says you have to put salt on the ring. It's salt. Yeah, I remember told it's derech eretz, just like giving the libations and the meal offerings is derech eretz. You serve the master, the king is served steak. He should have some bread and some wine with it, of course. So too, a little salt. How can you eat meat without salt? Okay, all meat requires what? Yes. Actually, yeah, we have a very anthropomorphic understanding of God. Specifically, like I said, anthropomorphic. God is basically, you'll see this when you become husbands and fathers, and you know this also from experience. What do you want from kids? You want them just to do what I said. That's what a man wants. His wife to cook for him.
He got from the army.
Yeah, that's how we understand God. The prophets the prophets and sages were men. So they describe to us, Lashon B'nai Adam, what God wants. But like I told people, had more of the prophets and sages been women, they would have described God's will in much more feminine ways, like about understanding our feelings and other such girlyisms. But what we're going to do is that our transmitters of Torah were men, and they spoke like men, and they describe these in ways that we can stand it as other men. But it doesn't mean that Chas v'shalom, it's not that God is actually comparable to a man who just wants to be obeyed. Okay, it's very basic. We say Avinu Malkeinu. You understand what it means to have a father. You appeal to your father, so you appeal to God. If you lack a father, you don't understand this basically. If you lack a king, you also don't mean how to relate to God as a king. Okay, so it's not something to laugh at, just to understand that it's a limitation in our understanding. And then all the limbs are brought up onto the altar. When does he take out the Gidon Asher? At the top of the Mizbeach. Where's the Gidon Asher located? It's in the hind leg. Where's the start? Yeah, you're pointing to your own Gidon Asher. Gidon Asher is actually it's a nerve that exists in most animals. Even chickens have Gidon Asher. Wait a minute. Do we remove the Gidon Asher from the chicken? No, you can actually eat it. It's right down the middle of what's called the Mishulash. In the chicken thigh, Rabbi Lach has a picture. The Gidon Asher is like right there in the middle. So why is that not an Isser? It's not an animal that has a kaf yorech. It doesn't have the ball of the hip. Only saying that has a ball of the hip. Mammals have those. Birds do not have that. So it's not their Gidon Asher, their sciatica nerve is not forbidden. Wait, but how do they take it out? Wait a minute. So there's a point where they have to take it out. There's a way people used to do it. It's called nikur. And they say the person rips out the Gidon Asher. A lot of kashrus, they don't even deal with it. They just put the whole thing, just send it to the Gentile processing plant, which is fine. But the Rambam says, remember that classic Rambam Ravid Machlokes? The Korban Pesach is roasted whole. So the Rambam says you don't take out the Gidon Asher until you're done roasting it. And the Ravid says, that's not kosher. I throw it back in your face if you try to feed me that. Shom to lefanov. Okay, so that's the rabbi likes to cite the one. That's a Rambam versus Ravid. It's in here. Yeah. So the Gidon Asher is removed. It says, "Al kain lo yochelu v'nei Yisrael Gidon Asher." The children of Israel shall not eat the Gidon Asher. But why does it have to be taken out? Okay, because I understood this, that's what has to be done. It's thrown on the deshin in the middle of the mizbeach. It turns out, you look at, there's a schematic sometimes, I think in some of your halachas, it shows you, if you're looking at the mizbeach, there's a small pyre on the northwest that's just there to keep the fire going, and another one, maybe I'm confusing it, there's two small fires on the west side of the altar, two small fires that are to keep the fire going. Okay, the mitzvah of just, Eish Tamid, the Eish Tamid as opposed to the Ner Tamid. And then there's the small fire to produce coals for the incense. And then there's the main big fire, which is on the front right, or the southeast corner, because that's the one that the Kohanim see first when they go up the ramp. And right in the middle is the tapuach. That's this deshin in the middle of the mizbeach. Deshin means, basically, modern Hebrew means fertilizer. Why? Because ashes make good fertilizer. A big pile of all burnt up stuff that's already done. So that's the tapuach also, the pile. And it was actually on holidays when they have the most korbanos, so that was the thing, to have a nice big ash pile. So the ashes are removed from the main pyre on the front right side, the southeast corner. Mm-hmm. That's where the main fire is. So that's where he's doing it. So that's called the deshin, that's right in the middle of his mizbeach. That's the tapuach, the big pile of already burned stuff. So the Gidon Asher is basically thrown away, because that deshin will be removed. They're going to eventually just clean it out. Remember, the tapuach, it just can't keep getting bigger. Eventually the Kohanim, take it away. It says here, we're going to get to it, the Truma deshin. Kohanim, it was their option to remove as much deshin as they wanted at the end from the Truma deshin. If they were going to take it away, it was the more the merrier. So that's where he put it. V'zorei kol every malhaish, and he throws all the limbs onto the fire. And this is important because it actually has to be an act of zrika. They're actually throwing the limbs. It's not that the Kohen walks over ceremoniously and holds, let's say he has the head and the peder, as it says, the big piece of fat that's in the abdomen over here that covers everything else. He doesn't just present it and put it onto the fire nicely. He actually has to give an overhand throw. Okay, and you can see this in the Machon Mikdash pictures. Underhand, I don't think really works. It's not considered a throw. It's like softball, yeah. At least sidearm. So they show them a real overhanded throw. Okay, Keshem Sha'adam Bizrika, Kach kol habasar bizrika. He has to throw the meat. It has to be thrown onto the fire. V'achar shezorkan chozer v'orecho tan ala eish. And afterwards he threw them, but then he goes back and he arranges it nicely. So he has to be Makai Zrika, but also to V'arachotan. Shdemar V'aracha Koenotam. So he accomplishes the Zrika and the Aricha. Zrika is the throwing and also then putting it nicely. And by the way, we saw also Mahapech Bitzinor. We saw the Kohen who's leaving the base of Mikdash. Somehow he got Tameh. How can he become Tameh, by the way? Well, an easy way to become Tameh the base of Mikdash is there was no tumah there. There's no dead animals that a cat brought in overnight. Thank God no one's dead. No one's become a Balkari somehow in the middle of the temple service. How does he become Tameh? Well, Nivlasa Oaf. If a bird is killed, not through proper slaughter or through Malika, if he did Malika wrong, he messed up the Malika, so that bird is now a Nevela, right? Anything that's not slaughtered properly is a Nevela. So now you have a Tumas Nevela. So you could find where Tuma comes from in there. So this Kohen basically has to go out. We saw the fastest way possible. And by fastest, we don't mean time-wise, we mean shortest distance. So the Rambam gave an example of a Kohen who somehow does the avoda without stopping. He's on his way out, so he will not be hit with the crime of leaving slowly, but he somehow does the avoda in this state of impurity. How? Because he has a pitchfork that's called the tzinor, and he's somehow from down below on his way out past the mizbeach, he pushes the avar onto the fire in a nice better. He arranges it better. Remember we saw halacha. Okay, we just saw it the Shabbos and with the guys who were learning Hebrew. So it's an example, but this is something that he did. The aricha is done, and you could have the Rambam gives a case where somehow the Kohen's impure and does the avodah in state of impurity without being hit for staying in the temple in a state of impurity because he can't be in because he's on his way out, so he's not hit with the isser. Yeah, very strange. Ve'varim shet salon. It's slayan. Says slayan. Let's say he pre-roasted them, pre-roasted the large pieces of meat, and then put them on this mizbeach. We saw this halacha back in Perek Daled, the 11th halacha. It says here that a person does the korban has to have certain intentions, right? The intention is reach, and the intention is nichobach. We said reach means that when the limbs are burned on the altar, they'll give a good smell, an initial good smell, and nichoach means that it pleases God. God did his will has been done. So there we saw that on the bama there was no such requirement. Technically speaking, on a bama, they could have pre-roasted the limbs and then burnt them on the altar. So meat actually makes a different smell. If you were to just take a fresh piece of meat and just throw it directly onto the fire, it'll make a certain smell. But if you take a cooked piece of meat, or roast a piece of meat and then burn it, it'll have a significantly different smell. Apparently, that's what this halacha assumes. Have you tried this? Okay, burning two different pieces of meat. One piece of meat burned raw, fresh, and the other meat burned after it had been cooked or roasted. Apparently, all things being equal, the first will have a more delightful smell. Apparently. By the way, the smell of burning meat is different than the smell of roasting meat. They're similar. Right? You can smell when the steak is being burned and when the steak is being, just barbecued properly. They're different smells. But and then if you took a steak that's fully the perfect steak and then burn it, would give a different smell also, apparently. Okay. It was what? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, don't waste food. But apparently, Chazal had enough experience that's what they taught us. And there would be, I think they did this. They did this all the time. This is a regular. Never. The problem is that we've been so disconnected from the base of Mikdash. We have no clue what these things are like, right? Most people, you tell them lechem aponim was a thick type of bread, a thick matzah, thick gigantic matzah loaves. Now most matzahs we see, even those people who are eating soft matzahs, is still really thin. How do you make a thin matzah? How do you get what happens if you bake it? I'm saying. But normally bread, if you don't allow the bread to be leavened and has that certain airiness to it, and you try to bake it then, if your bread's not airy and you bake it, it'll be dense, right? Yeah. So I don't know, what's that kind of bread like? Who bakes such a thing? What? It's nasty. Well, apparently it was great for the Kohanim who ate the lechem aponim. It was delicious.
Somebody who's made bread by forgetting the yeast. So.
Okay. I told you why I did that gigantic ball of dough that I rescued from the matzah factory. I mentioned one of the videos. You don't remember my trip to the matzah factory?
When did you do this?
I went to the matzah factory. It must have been Rosh Chodesh Nisan, like 2015 or one of those years.
When did you?
When Rosh Chodesh Nisan was Shabbos. So it was Erev Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. I went with Yosef Kaplan and Rabbi Geffen, who used to live here. It was his idea. Rabbi went. Most people bake their own matzahs. They go to a hand matzah establishment like we do. Bake your own matzahs is fun. You make shmur matzahs, great. But some people are makpid to dafka use a machine. So the Jerusalem Matzah Factory in Atarot lends out its oldest machine for frummies who want to come and work the machine for an hour and make their own matzahs machine matzahs before Pesach. So that's what he wanted to do. So he needed people, one guy to drive. Like, who wants to come? So we took him up on his offer, and we went. And it was quite exciting. I spent a whole morning at the Jerusalem Matzah Factory, and I saw that right before we got there, the machine had shut down. It's a whole assembly line. Takes in dough, spreads out the dough, bakes the dough. It's all, it's all automated. However, it's an old machine. It broke down. So we just saw outside in the courtyard, the workers had stopped the machine, taken out all the dough. The dough that was right at the beginning of the process, that was still dough. And they were putting into bins and disposing of it. And the matzah that had just been in the oven, some was overcooked, some was on fire. Like you saw, it's like smoldering matzahs. Like, oh man, this is really dangerous in the garbage like this. There's smoldering matzahs, and some were undercooked matzahs, and the rest was dough. So that's outside the factory when we got there. Inside the factory, they're still cleaning out dough from the machine. They took these balls of dough. Now, to make machine matzahs, they use very little water in the mix. How they even mix it? Hydraulics. They use a hydraulic machine to do it. Like real powerful machines to do it. Regular hand can't do it. Hand matzahs have a higher water content than machine matzahs because they're mixed by hand. You need that, otherwise you can't do it. So I took this ball of dough, I grabbed it from them. They said, they're just going to dispose of it. I said, why? I'll keep it. They said, it's comets. We're not inspecting this. So we shut down the machine, so it's going to be thrown away. So I took a ball of dough about this big, this heavy, dense dough, and put it in some plastic bags and took it home. When I got home that afternoon with that big matzah I told you guys about, the Rebbe's matzah, they had a machine going. The machine on the left is churning out shmur matzahs and regular matzahs. It's working like clockwork. There's a few Jewish mashgichim, some Arab workers. That's their moneymaker. The thing works 24/7, churning out matzahs and boxes the matzahs. It's great. The machine on the right is also churning out matzahs also, but it's less attended. And it's not packaging. The whole packaging process isn't happening there. And the middle machine, they give to people who want to be pious and make their own matzahs. And that's a machine that breaks down and it's slower. And that's one we're playing with. So I see the machine on the right. Wait, it's churning out matzahs. Less people are operating it. Why? It's not packaged. The matzahs come off the conveyor belt and fall through a hole in the floor into a gigantic grinder. It's the matzah meal machine. Matzah meal is mixed with a little bit of sugar. Something it's pancake mix. Matzah meal is just as it is, gets packaged. They do everything with matzah meal, right? So this is 2 weeks before Passover. And the matzahs that come off of the matzah meal machine are not cut lengthwise. They're only cut widthwise, which means they're as long as 5 matzahs. The matzahs come out of the regular machine are also cut widthwise. So you get 5 matzahs in a row, 5 matzahs in a row. These matzahs are still attached. Basically, we're never cut.
Wow.
So it's a matzah, it's a machine matzah, wide as 1 matzah, but 5 long. So I asked the proprietor's 2 sons were there. They're in charge of the day. I said, and they let us take for the matzah machine lo sachsom shor b'disho, right? You want to eat. If you're in the matzah factory, I guess you could eat some matzah. And how much matzah can you eat? Take a matzah so you can eat it. Fine. What else? They're not going to let you bring other food into the factory, so you might as well eat a matzah when you're there. I asked them, can I take one of these gigantic matzahs before it falls into the grinder? They said, no one's ever asked us that. Yeah, go ahead. So I took one. It was like, wow, look at that matzah. It's great. The Rebbe's matzah. It's like the Tish matzah. And so everybody's like, I want to take a matzah also. It was rainy and windy outside that Rosh Chodesh, Erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan. I had a really hard time bringing that matzah back to the car. Went to Yosef's car. I'm like, I'm going to make sure this matzah survives the trip to the car and just survive the car. And I brought it home that day. I got home around 12:30 in the afternoon. Showed my wife the kids are coming from Ghana. Like we have this matzah for Pesach. Look at it. My wife was so excited she started posing it for pictures. My wife broke the matzah a few minutes in. She was like trying to pose it for pictures. She broke it right down the middle. Yeah. Like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
I have pictures somewhere on the computer maybe in this computer of that matzah. So it was very unfortunate. It didn't survive the 2 weeks. I don't know how it would have. Whatever. There's no box that can hold a matzah this big, and it's a matzah. It cracks so easily. Okay. And I came home with a ball of dough, a gigantic ball of dough that I tried to continue kneading and shaping into challahs. This is the part for you, David. So that ball of dough, I had to add water to it once I got home. So this ball of dough was 5 hours old. No leavening, very dry, but I added water to it. And I made some challahs out of it, that Erev Shabbos. And those challahs were basically not so risen. They're technically chametz because they were old. The dough was 5 hours old before it went to the oven. But it's not like they were well leavened, but they tasted like matzah. You got a nice, distinctly matzah taste to them because, nothing in it, lechem oni taste. Okay. So that's my trip to the matzah factory. I hope it's entertaining. I had a gigantic matzah. Okay.
I only had a kazait for the sake.
Ha'isha asher natata imadi. Okay, it's that woman's fault, like the Adam Rishon said. Okay. So the children remember the matzah. It was a big deal. I back then we were using the social media that we used back then before WhatsApp was Glide. You guys remember Glide? My neighbor is the one who came up with the application. He worked on it. So that's what people used to send videos to each other. So I took it on Glide. So I remember if I have the Glide files, people still use Glide. Something or Zip or something like that. Maybe I get the name wrong. Okay. So here's it goes. How do you chop up or how do you dissect, or for lack of a better word, the burnt offering? It says here, Lo haya shover da regel. He wouldn't break the leg. Why do they break the leg? Because apparently that's something that you normally do. You break the leg in order to hang it, in order to cross the legs a certain way. So you can hang the animal by its hind legs. You have to break one of the legs to do it. No, you don't break that leg. Okay? Ela nokvo. You pierce its knees. You basically hook it up at the knees and the kneecaps. That's how you do it. One foot in this, one leg in this, one kneecap in this hook, and one kneecap in that hook. And I think they show you a picture there. It shows you an animal displayed, hung upside down by its knees, right? The hooks through the kneecaps, and that's how they do it. Yeah. Vitolebo, and that's hung from that. Umafshit, and then you start skinning it. Bimayashor, mafshito below tliya. If it's an ox is really big bull. Par is sometimes, ox is basically, what's the difference? In the Torah, shore is basically the ox that you're using for burden. The one you used to have the plow was usually the fully grown bull. Now it's a beast of burden, so you call it an ox. But in some forms of English, the difference between an ox and a bull is, castration. The ox is castrated. Not all the time. Certainly not in Hebrew. When you talk about this ox, it's forbidden to Jews to do so, and Jews did not really do so. Okay, so a shore just means it's used for these purposes. So if it's a shore fully grown, don't forget that's the biggest of the behemoths, right? And it's no small feat to be able to even check such a thing. Have you ever walked over to an ox? How big is an ox? How much does it weigh? It weighs a ton. Well, half a ton. Well, yeah. So the cows are the females. It's a little bit smaller. You don't use a cow to pull a plow. Yeah, you got to have bulls. So the bull is mighty. A full-grown bull and kal vachomer, bison and buffalo, which are basically almost the same. They're also overgrown behemoths with horns. They could take on a lion on a good day. It's a suffix. Who will win? Lion versus the ra'im. Lion versus the water buffalo or the wild ox, which has fully grown horns and can charge at full speed. Who's going to win, lion or ox? I give it about 50-50. You can see nature videos about that.
1 versus 1?
Yeah, 1 versus 1. And sometimes you can packs. Sometimes in a pack, sometimes the lions win, sometimes the behemoths win. But you understand, this thing is huge. Okay, so I guess you can't even. How are you even going to hang it? Who's going to lift it up to hang it? So there's another way. You put on its back basically. Okay, so you skin it without hanging it. Put it on its back. Umafshit, and then he skins it. Ad shehu magia lachazeh. He starts with the legs basically. There's an incision they make around the legs to start skinning, and until he gets to the animal's breast. Chatachet arosh, then he cuts off its head. Untano la kohen, and he gave it to the kohen. V'chatachet akra'ayim v'untanon la'acher. Kra'ayim means the bottom parts of the legs. Okay. That's what you see. Like the commentary points it out to you, and it gives it to us. So each piece that comes off the animal, there's a kohen who's ready to receive it in order to proceed in the procession up the ramp of the altar in order to put it on the fire. And then he completes the skinning. I don't think the head was skinned because it says that he first cut off the head. Okay, so the skin remains on the head. The head doesn't really have this good skin. Basically, you have a picture there. It shows you different types of skin. Maybe turn the page. There's different ways to skin an animal. How you cut it. There's a way to skin it for chemet and this type of skinning.
Shows
No.
the point.
What?
It just shows the point.
The void? The bird. Oh, so one of the future pages is going to show it. Different ways to skin the animal. Or maybe you passed it already. So there's the point is the Gemara and the Mishneh Avodah Zarah mentions, or maybe it's in the introduction. Okay, there's a long introduction to this also. They talk about orot levuvin. What's orot levuvin? Mentioned in the Gemara and the Mishneh Avodah Zarah. So when the Jews skin these animals, basically you see that it's a big flat skin, and you see that there's places where the limbs used to be, right? You could tell where the neck was. Orot levuvin has a mysterious hole right in the middle of the hide where the heart was.
Mhm.
A lavuv or levuvin is basically the plural of lavuv. Even though it's talking about behemoths, so it should be levuvot. Lavuv means the idolaters had a ritual whereby the first thing you do is rip out the poor animal's heart. That's what they do. Pierce it right there and just rip out the heart. That was done in pagan practice. Pretty nasty way to kill the animal. So if you saw a hide which basically has this hole in it, that means that that's what the idolaters did to kill the animal, and it means that this skin is possible because we're involved in Avodah Zarah. So that's like the basis for the idea that these crazy devil worshippers do such a thing. Where's it from? Classically, I think it was a Indiana Jones thing back when Indiana Jones movies were good. Yeah, so that's where they got it from. Okay.
I hate trying to make my leather shoes in some requirements of it as well.
Yeah, well, you can't use it. It's tikrovis basically. If you find such a skin, it's tikrovis. So watch out for such a thing. I think there's some places where there's, yeah. Let's see what else. And he cuts the heart. Karat alev is also in kashrus issues. You make an incision in the heart so the blood drains out of it. I think Makbili says you cut it so that it comes out the neck hole. So it comes out, doesn't squirt the blood all over the place. It actually drains the blood in an efficient manner. And then it says he takes out the blood of the heart. And then he cuts off. What's the yadayim of the animal? Means the forelegs. And he gives them to someone else, another kohen to hold to bring up to the mizbeach. Allah l'regel haymanit. And then he starts cutting along to remember this thing is hanging upside down. So the head goes off first. Basically takes off the parts until last things to go where the regel means the hind legs. Yadayim is forelegs. Regel means hind legs. He cuts off that and gives it to the right leg. He gives to another kohen. And the two testicles are attached to this right leg. Because the testicle is right between the two legs. So the scrotum basically goes, if you're dissecting the animal, that's how you do it. Okay. And then he cuts open the animal. It means it cuts open the abdomen to expose the internal organs, the kishkas. Until the kishkas are showing. That's the intestines. He takes off the peder. The peder is a large piece of the chalev. That's basically the first thing he encounters in the abdomen. Okay. The pidro. So has anybody ever seen a peder? There's pictures in the lock book. I should have brought it. Okay. So that part they put it on top of the head. The peder is a large sheet of fat. And there's already a kohen there who's holding the animal's head. So they put that peder on top of the head. Well, that's how they're going to serve it. Al beit shchita. And it's what part of it? So basically, let's see the animal. This is the animal's head, right? See, this is the front side of the animal's head. The kohen who's holding has it like this, so that the neck, the part where they did the shchita at the neck, that's the part that's up, and the peder is covering that part of the neck. Okay. So if you look at the animal's neck, by the way, they cut off the head. You'd see that there's a few pipes in the animal's neck. There's the spinal cord surrounded by the spine. There's the major arteries. There's the artery that goes up and the artery comes down. The one that brings the blood to the brain, the one that lets it come down. There's the food pipe and there's the windpipe. When all those are discernible, they all look unique and they all have their own location. And people who do shchita have to know what they're cutting. Okay. Remember, when you're doing shchita, what are you going for? What does a shochet have to cut? What? and windpipe and the food pipe. Windpipe and food pipe get cut. It's not necessarily the blood vessels. So you could do a kosher shechita, and you could avoid, perhaps, if you're really good at this somehow, to not cut the major arteries. But often it does involve, just to get to them, you'll get a lot of blood come out. Okay, ask a shochi. There's a video that they tried to do this. They tried to show how terrible the slaughterhouses are. The usual animals are people to people. I want to say, like, the Jewish slaughterhouse is terrible at hurting animals. And Rabbi Braunspiegel said, remember, this is a big thing in the news. That animal cruelty at the Jewish slaughterhouse. He says it's a schlachtoys. Well, it's not a carnival. It's not. What do they expect? The animal's turned upside down in the thing, and you see the shochi comes over. He's wearing a gigantic suit, coveralls, and the shechita knife for this gigantic bull is basically a sword. Huge, and he starts cutting. It just sprays a lot of blood. There's a lot of blood that comes right out. Yeah. And what do you expect it? What do you expect it to be? That's what killing animals involves. Yeah, I know it turns a lot of people vegetarian, and perhaps maybe there's something to it. I don't know. I'm not rough cook. However, you have to know that it's not pleasant. There's a lot that goes into this, and it says al beit shechita. That's the point where he had slaughtered it. And he takes out the inner organs. See, kravayim means the innards, and he gives them to another kohen. Usually, the other kohen might have a vessel in which to hold them. Not just straight on his hands. Okay. Or a bull-like thing. Where does it say it? Where did I say? I talk kravayim. You said kravayim with a yud or with a mem or with a nun? What do you have there? I have it with a nun. I have it with a mem over here. Both. Okay. Okay. The with a nun is a Mishneh form, and with a mem it's a more Hebrew form, right? That's usually the rule. Mishnaic/Aramaic form is with nun. He goes and washes them off with water. The kravayim, right? These innards have to be washed with water. They have blood and guts and other stuff, sometimes waste product on them. Demar v'akerev v'akra'ayim yirchatz b'mayim. The bottom parts of the legs and the kerev, the things inside the animal, have to be washed with water before being burned on the mizbeach. Rambam adds, lo b'yayin, don't wash it with wine. What's the havamina? Maybe be covered. Okay. Lo b'mezek. What's mezek? Doesn't mean weather. Mezek means diluted wine. Why? Because the Rambam paskins the proper way. The proper way to drink wine is to dilute wine, 1/4 wine, 3/4 water. Right? That's derech eretz. Right? That's derech eretz, like we discussed earlier today. Right? Derech eretz of wine. V'lo bishar mashkin, and no other liquids. Shouldn't wash with apple juice. Again, that's what he has. Okay? What?
That means most wine people drink nowadays is young.
Yes, it's a real wine. I mean, it's a good wine. I hope they didn't dilute it. V'chol hamimot kshirin. All types of water are kosher. What does this come to include? Where do you get the water from? It doesn't have to be a kior water. Let's say sacred water. A lot of times in the temple, the water has to be in a sacred vessel. Kohen has to wash his hands from the kior, right? And they take water from the sota. It has to be put into a sacred vessel. Sometimes from the kior itself. Or maybe you'd say that has to be mayim from a mayon or mayim from a mikvah or something, right? Sometimes there's a hakpada. For example, to do the this week's parsha, once again, paraduma, you need to draw water from dafka from a mayon, right? But once you draw that water, what does it matter? Now it's mayim shuvim. Mayim shuvim even apostles a mikvah. But the point is, you have to take water from the source. In this case, the Torah has no hakpada of the source of the water for washing the kishkas of the korban. I guess we'll stop there for today. Except we'll conclude with a blessing. We should have practical experience in keeping these mitzvahs, starting tomorrow, God willing. Amen. Questions, comments? Don't forget to send them in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.